The city lights glimmered against the tall windows of Ethan Cole's office, painting his reflection in gold and shadow. He stood there, silent, a man who had conquered everything, except his own heart. Outside, the rain whispered against the glass, but inside, his world was falling apart. Across from him stood Emma, the only person who had ever seen the man behind the title. Her hands trembled as she tried to meet his cold eyes, eyes that had once looked at her with warmth. "Ethan," she whispered, voice breaking, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like thunder. Ethan's jaw tightened, his heartbeat echoing in his chest, but his face remained unreadable. He had spent years mastering control, never showing fear, never showing weakness. And now, when life demanded his heart, he hid behind pride. "Forget me," he said finally, the words low and final. Emma froze, disbelief spreading across her face as tears filled her eyes. She wanted to remind him of the promises, of the nights he said she was his peace, but he had already turned away. As she walked out into the storm, her tears mixed with rain, her heart shattered but still beating. Ethan stood alone, staring at the empty door, convincing himself it was for the best. But deep down, a silence grew inside him, cold, hollow, and unending. He didn't know it then, but that one sentence would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emma left the city that night with nothing but a small suitcase and the sound of his words echoing in her mind. The train carried her away from everything familiar, yet every mile felt heavier than the last. She pressed her hand over her stomach, whispering softly to the tiny life growing inside her. She didn't know how she would survive, but she knew she had to. There was no turning back now. The pain slowly turned into determination, fierce, quiet, and unstoppable. In a small town far from the noise of glass towers and boardrooms, Emma started over. She found work in a flower shop, the scent of roses and lavender helping her forget the cold marble floors of Ethan's world. Nights were long, but she talked to her unborn child, promising love and safety. When the twins were born, two tiny faces with his eyes, she cried, not from sorrow but from strength. She named them Liam and Noah, her reason to keep going. Years passed, and she built a life filled with laughter instead of luxury. Each smile of her sons reminded her that love didn't need mansions or diamonds. Still, sometimes in quiet moments, she wondered if Ethan ever thought of her, if he ever regretted the words that broke everything. Little did she know, fate was already weaving their paths back together, and the man who told her to forget him was about to remember everything he lost. 6 years later, Ethan Cole stood before a mirror in his office, surrounded by wealth yet haunted by silence. Success had followed him everywhere, new deals, new awards, new faces that praised him. But when the lights dimmed and the parties ended, emptiness crept in like a shadow he couldn't escape. He told himself it was just fatigue, that work would fill the void. But every night his thoughts drifted to the woman he had told to forget him. He had buried her memory beneath ambition, yet her laughter still lived in the corners of his mind. One afternoon, as he stepped out of his car near a community center for a charity event, he saw a familiar figure helping children plant trees. For a heartbeat he couldn't breathe. It was her. Time had changed her. Emma's hair was tied loosely, her smile softer but stronger. And beside her, two young boys ran, their laughter echoing through the park. Ethan's chest tightened when one of them turned, and he saw his own brown eyes staring back at him. the world seemed to blur. Every sound faded except the pounding of his heart. He had thought control made him powerful, but in that moment he felt powerless. The empire he built meant nothing compared to what stood before him, what he had thrown away. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something break inside him, not from loss, but from awakening. Ethan couldn't move. The world around him kept going, cars passing, people talking, but he stood frozen, staring at the life that should have been his. Emma laughed as the boys chased each other through the grass, sunlight touching her face in a way that made her seem untouchable. He had faced business giants, courtroom battles, and global deals, yet he had never known fear until that moment. What could he possibly say to her now? That he was sorry? That he finally understood what love meant after losing it? The words felt too small for the years that had passed. He turned to leave, but a small voice stopped him. "Mister, you dropped this." One of the twins ran up, holding Ethan's pen that had fallen from his pocket. Ethan knelt down to take it, and when their eyes met, the boy grinned. It was like looking into a mirror of his own childhood. "Thank you," Ethan managed to say, his voice softer than it had been in years. "You look familiar," the boy said before running back to his mother. Emma turned, her eyes meeting Ethan's for the first time in 6 years. The world seemed to still. Neither spoke, but everything they never said hung between them. Pain, regret, and something fragile still alive. Ethan wanted to walk toward her, to tell her the truth that had burned in him for years, but fear held him back. She gave a polite nod, her smile steady yet distant, and then she turned away. That single glance shattered the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse surrounded by silence, the city glittering below like 1,000 reminders of everything he had gained and lost. For the first time, his success felt meaningless. The echo of the little boy's laughter haunted him more than any business deal ever could. He poured himself a glass of water, staring at his reflection in the window. He saw the same face the world admired, strong, confident, untouchable, but beneath it, he saw regret carved into every line. He had spent years building an empire out of pride, only to realize that pride had cost him everything real. The next morning, he made a decision. He searched for Emma, using every contact and resource he had. It took days before he found her, working as a teacher at the local school, surrounded by children who adored her. Watching from a distance, he felt both pride and pain. She looked happy, complete, untouched by the loneliness that consumed him. He wanted to speak, but every word he rehearsed felt wrong. What could he offer her now, a man who once told her to forget him? When their eyes met again through the schoolyard fence, she looked surprised but calm. He finally stepped closer. "Emma," he said softly, "I was wrong." The words trembled with years of silence and guilt. She studied him for a long moment, her voice steady when she replied, "You were right to tell me to forget you. It made me stronger." Her words hit him harder than any loss he had ever faced. Ethan stood there, her words echoing like a verdict he knew he deserved. But there was something in her eyes. Pain, yes, but also the strength of a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. He wanted to say so much, to ask about the boys, to beg for a second chance, but his voice failed him. For years he had spoken to command, to lead, to conquer. Now all he could do was whisper, I never stopped thinking about you. Emma looked at him, calm but distant. Thinking doesn't change what you left behind, Ethan, she said gently. The boys don't need memories. They need presence. Her words cut deep, not out of anger but truth. He nodded, unable to hide the emotion burning in his chest. Please, he said quietly, just one day. One day to see them, to show you I've changed. Emma hesitated, the part of her that once loved him fighting the part that had learned to survive without him. Finally, she nodded once. One day, she said. The next afternoon, Ethan met his sons for the first time. They laughed together, talked about school, and showed him drawings of dreams bigger than money could buy. As the sun set, Ethan realized it wasn't power that made a man rich. It was love, time, and forgiveness. When he said goodbye, tears filled his eyes. He knew one day wasn't enough, but it was a start. For the first time in years, his heart felt alive again, humbled, hopeful, and human.